The descent cage is crushed between rotating rings of stone, leaving 4 people sealed beneath the surface with no clear way back. Thank you for joining me. If this opening catches your curiosity, please leave a like. Gideon and Seraya must choose a route before the buried city changes again. Step into the story with them. The descent cage lurched hard enough to throw Seraya Thenn against the safety rail. Gideon Frost caught the back of her harness before her shoulder struck the wall. The cage groaned around them, metal cables singing above the narrow shaft as dust poured through the lamps and pale sheets. "Tell me that was scheduled," Seraya said. "It was scheduled for 6 hours from now," Mara Vexen replied from the instrument rack. Her voice had gone flat in the way experienced people sounded when the numbers were worse than fear. "The stress wave is early." Gideon looked up through the grated roof. The cable disappeared into darkness, trembling against the stone. Above them, the survey ship waited on the surface of Ardos. A kilometer of cable linked it to the cage, and that cable suddenly looked much thinner than it had 10 seconds earlier. "Surface team, pull everyone who has not entered the shaft," Gideon said into his wrist transmitter. Static cracked across the channel. "Do not send the second cage. Repeat, do not send it." A voice answered through interference, but Seraya had already turned toward the shaft wall. Fresh movement had exposed a band of carved symbols beneath the dust. Blue light from her scanner passed across them as the cage shuddered again. "I need 1 minute," she said. "You have none. These markings are not decorative. They may identify the structure. They can identify it after we stop falling." The shaft gave a deep grinding sound. Stone moved. Not loose rock. Not a collapse. Whole rings of the shaft rotated around them, each layer turning in a different direction. The descent cable snapped sideways, pinning itself between 2 closing bands of stone. The cage tilted until Seraya's boots left the floor. Gideon slammed one hand against the emergency release and fired a mechanical anchor from the cage wall. The steel bolt punched into a dark beam hidden behind the carved stone. The line went tight, catching the cage as the main cable began to tear through its upper mount. "Everyone against the inner rail," he ordered. Harlan Vosik dragged 2 equipment cases aside and pulled Mara close. Seraya locked her arm through the rail. Gideon cut the main cable. The cage dropped 1/2 meter and swung into the wall. The impact shook the breath from all of them, but the anchor held. Above, the severed cable vanished between the moving rings. Mara stared at her readings. "The shaft is closing." "No," Seraya said, watching the stone. "It is changing function." Panels opened along the wall. Small machines unfolded from recesses, each one built from jointed arms and blunt tool heads. They moved toward the cage with patient precision. Gideon drew his compact cutter. "They are maintenance units," Seraya said. "Do not shoot them." One machine clamped onto the external lamp and twisted it free. It stole our light. It removed an unauthorized obstruction. Very polite city. Gideon leaned through the broken side of the cage and cut the nearest machine's gripping arm before it reached the anchor line. Terrible customer service. The remaining units changed direction and began stripping loose cable from the wall. Mara's screen flashed. "The rock bands are still rotating. We have maybe 40 seconds before this section seals." Gideon clipped a rope to the anchor line and kicked open the lower panel of the cage. Beyond it, a narrow maintenance passage had appeared between 2 moving slabs. "Out." Harlan first. Mara behind him. "Seraya, you go next. You're last." That is usually how counting works. They crawled through the lower panel and slid along the rope into the passage. The air smelled of mineral dust and old metal. Harlan landed badly, caught himself, then turned to help Mara. Seraya dropped beside them and looked back. Gideon came through just as the cage was crushed between the rotating rings. The anchor tore free. The cage folded inward without a dramatic explosion, only a slow metallic shriek that ended in silence. The passage behind them sealed. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Gideon checked the pressure gauge on his wrist. Air is thin but usable through suit filters. "We have 1 wired relay and my rescue beacon. Surface team can still track the beacon if the interference does not get worse. Interference is already worse, Mara said. The stress event is propagating through the crust. Seraya raised her scanner toward the wall. The symbols continued down the passage in repeating blocks. These are directional. Gideon gave her a look. Directional toward what? I'm not sure yet. Excellent. I prefer my escape routes mysterious. A heavy impact sounded farther down the corridor. Harlan turned just as a storage frame broke loose from the ceiling. It struck him across the thigh and drove him to the floor. At the same time, a thick wall panel began sliding down between him and the others. Harlan! Mara lunged forward. Gideon shoved her back before the descending wall caught her arm. Heat rose behind Harlan. A seam in the floor had opened, venting a stream of shimmering air into the trapped side of the passage. Seraya looked at the panel. It is an isolation barrier. If you damage it, the system may classify us as active interference. Harlan is active interference. He has less than a minute before the temperature reaches critical, she said. The wall may reopen if we find the control. We do not have the control. Gideon pulled two shaped charges from his belt. Seraya caught his wrist. A blast could redirect the vent. It could. Into us. It could do that too. Gideon. He met her eyes. He is alive now. The last gap under the wall narrowed. Gideon slid one charge against the side support, angled it away from the vent, and set the second higher to fracture the locking edge. He pushed Mara and Seraya behind a structural rib, then triggered both charges. The blasts were sharp and controlled. The panel jumped sideways, leaving a gap barely wide enough for a person. Gideon went through on his stomach. The air on the other side scorched the exposed edges of his gloves. Harlan was conscious, jaw clenched, one leg pinned beneath the frame. Tell me something useful, Gideon said as he braced a lifting bar under the metal. I dislike this planet. Good medical sign. Gideon levered the frame high enough for Harlan to drag his leg free. The wall began moving again. Seraya reached through the gap and grabbed Harlan's harness. Mara joined her. Together, they pulled him through while Gideon held the frame. The hot vent surged. Gideon dropped the bar and rolled under the wall as it slammed shut behind him. For one breath, everyone remained on the floor. Then the lights embedded in the corridor shifted from dim white to amber. Far away, machinery began to move. Seraya looked back at the damaged barrier. The system has changed state. Mara checked her instruments. Energy is moving through the structure. That blast did more than open the wall. Gideon crouched beside Harlan. Can you stand? With help. Harlan's leg was bruised and strained, but not broken. He tightened a support wrap around his thigh and injected a measured dose of pain control. I can walk, he said. I cannot run. Then none of us run unless the alternative is dying in place. Gideon rose and turned to Seraya. You were right about the system reacting. That does not make leaving him acceptable. I did not say it did. You did not ask what breaking the barrier would change. There is no time. There will always be no time if you solve every problem by breaking the nearest wall. Gideon glanced at the amber lights. That is unfair. Sometimes I break the floor. Mara gave a short, unwilling laugh. Seraya did not, but some of the anger left her face. She moved to the wall and studied the symbols more closely. These are not warnings to intruders. What are they? Gideon asked. Evacuation instructions. Harlan leaned against Mara. For the people who lived here? Yes. The arrows indicate pressure-safe routes, emergency assembly areas, and maintenance shelters. Seraya moved her scanner across a central symbol. This one directs occupants toward a regional control station. Up, Gideon asked. Deeper. He stared at her. The routes leading toward the surface are marked as thermal discharge channels, she said. If these symbols still match the structure, entering them would expose us to the same heat that nearly killed. Harlan, you're asking us to go farther into the machine that just sealed our exit. I am telling you the control station may be the only place capable of reopening it. Gideon took her scanner and held it beside the carved wall. Show me what each mark points to. No interpretation without something physical to match it. Seraya did. She explained the symbols one by one, linking each to vents, reinforced ribs, access panels, and pressure seals visible in the corridor. Gideon checked the structural logic. The two surface routes did lead into channels lined with heat-resistant plating. The deeper route had handholds, emergency alcoves, and old mounting points sized for living bodies. He returned the scanner. We use your route. You identify what the city intends. I decide how we move through it. And neither of us activates or damages anything without warning the other. Agreed. Seraya hesitated only a fraction before answering. Agreed. Her private decoder remained clipped beneath the inner layer of her field coat, hidden from Gideon and from the survey network. They had gone less than 200 meters when the corridor vibrated with a new rhythm. Not the deep pulse of moving stone. This was faster, mechanical, repeated. Cutting equipment, Gideon said. A section of wall ahead glowed red. Seraya pulled Harlan back as a circular blade punched through from the far side and carved a widening ring. The metal plate fell inward. Darius Kelm stepped through the opening in a heavy extraction suit, followed by Tessa Orvin and Calderin. Behind them, more workers maneuvered a portable forcing rig. Darius looked from Gideon to the damaged wall behind them. I was wondering who woke the place. Gideon folded his arms. You entered through an undeclared access point with industrial cutters. We entered through the route our contract paid to survey. Your contract did not include telling anyone else. It did not include sharing a discovery before ownership was established. Seraya's expression hardened. This site cannot be treated as a salvage field. Darius turned to her. Anything that can keep a world alive will not remain a museum piece. Tessa connected the forcing rig to an ancient control surface near the opening. We found a vertical route on the other side. It should lead toward the central power source. Seraya stepped closer. That interface is not a power control. You can read it? Darius asked. Enough to know forcing it is dangerous. Darius gestured to the sealed corridor behind Gideon. So, is standing here. Tessa engaged the rig. The ancient surface flickered. Internal mechanisms unlocked, and a broad gate slid open to reveal a dark, descending passage. For half a second, Darius smiled. Then the floor shook. Mara's instrument sounded a rapid alarm. Stress spike. 40 meters west. A thunderous collapse rolled through the wall. Dust burst from Darius's newly cut entrance. One of his workers shouted as part of their rear passage folded shut. Mara stared at the numbers. The gate drew power from a structural stabilizer. Seraya watched symbols appear across the ancient interface. Not drew. Redirected. Darius looked toward his trapped route, then back at her. Redirected from what? Something that was holding your ceiling up. Gideon pointed down the evacuation corridor. Regional Control Station. We are going there. Darius glanced at the descending gate he had opened. Our route is faster. Your route already buried itself once. It opened. So did a grave. The corridor shook again. Neither group had time to win the argument. Gideon moved first, guiding Harlan down the marked route. Seraya followed with Mara. Darius led his team through the gate, determined to reach the same destination by a different line. The two routes converged at the regional control station less than an hour later. Gideon's group arrived through a narrow maintenance tunnel. Darius's team entered from an upper platform, covered in dust and missing half their cutting equipment. The control chamber rose around them in concentric tiers. A central column displayed a dim map of the buried city, its lines pulsing as if slow circulation had returned to a sleeping body. Seraya connected her public scanner to the nearest port. The display resisted, then opened enough to reveal the surface shaft. Gideon saw the problem before she spoke. The shaft was glowing. It has been reassigned, Seraya said. The city is using it as a thermal exhaust route. What happens if we open it? Harlan asked. Superheated gas reaches the surface access area, where the ship's rescue team would stand, Mara said. Seraya nodded. Darius crossed to another console. Then change it back. The command authority is not here. This station only controls local distribution. A deeper map appeared. It showed a transport spine descending through several levels toward a central coordination district. Seraya traced the route. That center may be able to restore the shaft. Mara studied her readings. Every system we have activated has increased crush stress. We started with a 36-hour margin. We now have less than 30. Silence settled over the chamber. Gideon looked at the map. Between them and the coordination center lay a transit line, a sealed ecological zone, a gravitational storage district, and lower structures the display could no longer fully resolve. He turned to Seraya. From this moment, the mission is escape. Research comes second. Her eyes stayed on the map. If this city can redistribute planetary conditions, the research may be the reason any of us were sent here. It is not the reason Harlan is limping. No, but Elithra is losing entire settlements while we stand here. Darius looked between them. Then we agree the center matters. Gideon ignored him. No heathen roots. No wisheld warnings. If information affects survival, I get it. Seraya met his gaze. Agreed. She meant the route data and the dangers she understood. She did not yet mean the private access key beneath her coat. The city pulsed again. On the map, the shaft to the surface brightened from orange to white. Gideon picked up the last working relay spool. Then we go deeper before our exit cooks, everyone waiting above it. The ancient transport line had not moved in thousands of years. Yet Seraya found warmth beneath the dust when she pressed her palm to the boarding platform. Residual current, she said. The network is feeding this section again. Can it carry us? Gideon asked. It can carry something. Whether it intends to carry us is a separate question. A row of dark freight cars waited beyond the platform, low and broad, built to move machinery rather than passengers. Their sides were open, and magnetic clamps lined the floors. There was no engine. Power came through the rails from the city itself. Mara studied the route map. The line drops almost 2 kilometers. Walking would take most of our remaining window. Harlan tested his injured leg and failed to hide the pain that crossed his face. Walking would also leave some of us behind. Darius gestured to Tessa. Start it. Seraya stepped between her and the control pedestal. Not with the forcing rig. We do not have time for a lecture. Then enjoy the short explanation. The train draws power from the same network that is moving the crust. Force it open, and we do not know what stops working elsewhere. Darius's jaw tightened. Your careful method has not opened an exit. No, Gideon said, but his careless method buried his own. Tessa looked at Darius, then at the control pedestal. I can connect at low output. Let her handle the sequence. Darius gave a reluctant nod. Seraya entered a limited command through her public scanner. The pedestal answered with a sequence of symbols that changed too quickly for anyone else to follow. She did not use her hidden key. Instead, she matched the evacuation syntax from the upper level to a maintenance transport request. One by one, lights appeared beneath the freight cars. We have a short synchronization window, she said. Once the cars move, the city will reassess the route. What does that mean in useful language? Gideon asked. It may decide the train should not be there. There it is. He turned to the group. Injured people in the center cars. Lock every case to the floor. Do not trust the sides. They loaded quickly. Gideon fixed Harlan's support brace to a floor clamp, then checked each person's tether himself. Darius's workers brought their remaining forcing rig and 2 industrial power converters. Calder inspected the freight cars with the calm focus of someone who trusted machinery more than contracts. These brakes are mechanical backups, Calder said. Old but simple. Simple is my favorite advanced technology, Gideon replied. The train began to move. At first it rolled almost silently. Then the tunnel tilted downward and the cars accelerated. Ancient lights flashed past in long blue bars. The open sides gave them a view of support columns, ventilation shafts, and enormous channels descending beside the track. Seraya stood at the forward control point, reading the changing symbols. The route is being reclassified. Good or bad? Mara called. The system recognizes the cars as active freight, but does not recognize the cargo. Gideon looked down at himself. I have been called worse. A heavy clang came from the rear. One section of rail lifted behind the last car. Maintenance arms unfolded from the tunnel wall and removed the track in precise segments. It is dismantling the route, Calder said. The rear car struck a gap and jumped. Its coupling snapped halfway loose. Harlan and 2 workers injured in Darius's tunnel collapse were inside it. Gideon clipped his harness to the roof line before anyone could stop him. Seraya, keep the speed steady. The speed is controlled by the network. Then ask it nicely. He climbed over the side. Wind tore at him as the train dropped faster. The loose car swung behind the others, one coupling bar grinding against the mount. Harlan had released himself from the floor brace and was trying to secure one of the workers before the next impact. Gideon moved hand over hand along the roof edge. The tunnel narrowed around them. Blue lights reflected from his visor, then vanished as a support arch passed inches above his back. At the control point, Seraya entered another transport command. The symbols rejected it. She changed the sentence, not the request. Instead of identifying the cars as freight, she described them as maintenance equipment returning to a registered service zone. The network accepted the category for 6 seconds. The magnetic pull on the train stabilized. Gideon, you have 6 seconds, she said over the wired channel. Generous. He reached the broken coupling, locked his boots against the frame, and forced a steel pin through the misaligned joint. It stopped halfway. The system rejected Seraya's command. The train surged. The rear car swung outward. Gideon's left hand tore free, leaving him hanging from one arm and his tether. Seraya saw the energy map spike. Holding the synchronization longer would pull power from a distant life support station shown on the city grid. She could keep Gideon's car stable, but someone in another section might lose air. She cut the command. The train rolled free without magnetic control. Brakes! Calder shouted. He and 2 workers pulled the mechanical levers. The front cars shuddered, slowing just enough for the rear car to swing back into line. Gideon drove the pin through with the base of his cutter. The coupling locked. The train hit a descending curve with no active guidance. All the cars screamed against the rails. Gideon crawled back into the forward car as the last sections of track disappeared behind them. They reached the lower platform in a shower of sparks and stopped against a bank of old shock absorbers. For a few moments, only the ticking of hot metal filled the station. Seraya checked the scanner. We used nearly a third of the decoder battery. Darius stared at her. For one train, the city was actively trying to disassemble. Gideon unhooked his tether and flexed his scraped fingers. I told you, it charges by survival. Seraya looked at the control display. The synchronization collar is still active. The what? The collar that shows whether the city accepts the train on this route. Gideon smiled. That is too many words. Call it the city's mood ring. I will not. Every great scientific standard begins with resistance. The station doors opened onto a warm darkness filled with wet air. The ecological zone spread beyond them beneath a low, transparent roof. Dense growth covered the floor and climbed support pillars. Pale fronds turned slowly toward the heat of their lamps. Pools of black water reflected the ancient lights. Mara checked the route. The tunnel on the far side leads to the storage district. Harlan examined the injured people. We need 20 minutes before moving. We do not have 20, Darius said. We do if you want them alive at the end. Harlan's tone ended the discussion, although the countdown forced them to move again after 12 minutes. Harlan redistributed pain medication and oxygen filters. Gideon inspected the remaining shaped charges. He had fewer than half the number he had carried into the shaft. Tessa opened the forcing rig and replaced a burned coupling with parts from one of the train clamps. Seraya stood apart, studying the vegetation. Gideon joined her. You look cold. My suit is compensating. That was not an answer. She glanced at him. It was a precise statement. A worker near the rear raised his lamp toward a vine-covered wall. Something small moved beneath the leaves. Startled, he boosted the lamp to full power and drew a compact weapon. The entire wall came alive. Hundreds of pale creatures detached from a growth. They had flat bodies and thin gripping limbs. Their heads turned toward the worker in perfect unison. Do not fire, Seraya said. He fired. The weapon discharged a hot pulse. The creatures rushed toward it. Gideon shoved the worker behind a support pillar and activated a cold suppressant from the emergency pack. The first wave veered toward the heat of the weapon instead of following the moving people. They tracked temperature, Seraya said, not motion. More creatures stirred across the zone, drawn by the warmth of their suits. The far exit lay beyond 200 meters of dense growth. Seraya looked at the ventilation map. There is a side channel that rejoins the main path. If we move a stronger heat source through it, the colony should follow. We have one portable heat core, Harlan said. It is also our emergency warming supply. I will carry it to the branch and release it into the airflow. Gideon shook his head. Your body loses heat faster than ours. That is why I understand exactly how long I can remain without suit warming. You nearly froze waiting for the cage on the surface yesterday, and you nearly fell off a train 5 minutes ago. Neither event changes the physics. The creatures began moving closer, drawn by the combined warmth of the group. Seraya reduced her suit temperature. The nearest creatures turned away from her. I know the valve sequence, she said. You do not. Gideon looked at the side channel, then at the tether reel on his belt. You go. I move behind the partition with a line on you. Harlan watches your temperature. If he says stop, you stop. Seraya nodded. That is acceptable. You sound disappointed. I expected more resistance. I'm trying a new technique. Listening. It may require practice. She took the heat core. The group lowered their suit temperatures and moved slowly toward the main exit while Seraya entered the side channel. The creature shifted toward the core in her hands, flowing across the walls like pale water. Gideon kept pace on the other side of a metal divider, the tether passing through a maintenance slot. His visor displayed Seraya's body temperature falling fraction by fraction. At the first valve, she opened the airflow toward the side branch. At the second, she increased the draft. The creatures followed the moving heat. Seraya's hands began to shake. Harlan, Gideon asked. She has 90 seconds before I pull her out whether she likes it or not. I heard that, Seraya said. Good, Harlan replied. It saves time. She reached the final vent, locked the heat core into an old service tray, and opened the release. Warm air carried it deeper into the branch. The creatures surged after it. Seraya turned back, but her boots slipped on wet growth. The tether caught her before she fell into a pool. Gideon hauled her toward the divider and opened the emergency panel between them. He pulled her through as the last of the colony disappeared into the side branch. She tried to stand and failed. He wrapped her in the thermal blanket while Harlan increased her suit temperature slowly to prevent shock. The city has now stolen our light, our train, and our emergency heater, Gideon said. I am beginning to question the brochure. Seraya's lips trembled, but she smiled. You would not read the brochure. That is why I travel with experts. After her temperature stabilized, they crossed the ecological zone. No one suggested she remain behind. No one needed to. At the next service station, Mara placed her instruments beside the ancient map and pulled up the sequence of every system they had used. The train activation caused pressure loss here, she said, pointing to a distant district. The ecological valves caused a thermal rise near the upper shaft. Darius's gate caused structural load to shift into his entry tunnel. Seraya layered the city map over the crust readings. A pattern emerged. Energy did not disappear when they open a route. It moved. This city is not generating climate conditions, she said. It is redistributing them. Darius stepped closer. Redistributing heat. Heat, pressure, moisture, possibly seismic stress. The city transfers environmental load through the network. Then it can transfer favorable conditions too. Yes, Seraya said quietly. The possibility filled the room. For Elithra, a system capable of moving heat and pressure could mean farms surviving another winter, air remaining in settlements that have begun to lose it, and families returning to homes already marked for abandonment. Gideon saw the hope in her face and the danger beside it. Every time we use it, he said, somewhere else pays. We do not yet know whether that is a failure or the intended balance. We know the crust is getting worse. We also know the system has been inactive for thousands of years. A damaged network is not proof the original design was wrong. We came here to open an exit. I came here because my world is running out of exits. Calder and Tessa had moved ahead with 2 workers to inspect a sealed pressure route while the others studied the map. A faint signal interrupted them. It came through the relay line in short bursts, distorted by stone. "Extraction team," a voice said. "Pressure chamber failing. 2 trapped. Air below, 15 minutes. Calder's name followed, then Tessa's. Darius turned toward the sealed passage. Their route collapsed after the gate transfer. They must have reached the chamber from the other side. Seraya examined the local interface. The pressure door needs authenticated access. The public commands are locked out. Then use whatever you used on the train, Gideon said. It will not be enough. How do you know? Seraya did not answer. Gideon watched her hand move toward the inside of her coat. She removed a small decoder no one had seen before. The device unfolded around her wrist and displayed a deeper layer of symbols. Darius's eyes narrowed. You had a root key, not a complete one. It is an archaeological reconstruction. Gideon's voice became very calm. How long have you had it? Before we landed. You agreed not to hold back information that affected survival. I agreed not to hide route hazards. This key is not safe to connect to the shared network. The funding contract copies all recovered command structures to the sponsor. So you decided none of us needed to know another option existed. If the sponsor obtained full control before we understood the system, entire worlds could be placed under one company's authority. Calder's broken transmission returned. 9 minutes. Gideon looked toward the sealed pressure door. We finished this argument after they can breathe. Seraya connected the private decoder. The door rejected the first authorization. She altered the access level and created a temporary maintenance identity. Tessa answered from the trap side through a local hardline. My converter is burned, Tessa said. I can move the interval manually if you provide current. Seraya opened only the narrowest layer of the key. I will give you a 4-second authorization. You must close the connection before the system copies the sequence. I can do it. Darius activated the forcing rig despite Gideon's warning. We need enough pressure to move the door. The rig pressed against the outer frame. Gideon braced a hydraulic spreader beneath it, while Seraya sent the authorization. Inside, Tessa redirected her damaged converter. The valve moved. The pressure door opened 12 centimeters. Gideon forced the spreader wider. Calder reached through from the other side, coughing in thin air. Together, they held the opening while workers pulled Tessa out. Calder came through last. The moment everyone cleared, Seraya cut the key connection. The door slammed shut. Calder dropped beside Harlan, breathing through an emergency mask. Tessa's gloves were burned at the palms, but she remained conscious. Gideon turned to Seraya. The key stays with you. Every use is discussed first. You do not intend to confiscate it. I would have to understand it to use it. And I prefer tools that do not insult me in 3 extinct dialects. His humor did not soften the next words. But you do not get to decide alone what risks the rest of us are allowed to know. Seraya looked at Calder and Tessa, alive because she had used the device. Agreed. Behind them, Tessa's forcing rig completed an automatic diagnostic. Unknown to Seraya, it had recorded the brief authorization handshake. Darius removed the memory unit and secured it inside his suit. His own route was gone. His people were injured. The ship above had not answered his last 3 calls. He looked at Gideon. We combine resources until we reach the center. All resources, Gideon said. Darius handed over oxygen figures, medical packs, and 1 industrial converter. He did not hand over the memory unit or the forcing rig. Harlan finished checking Calder. The injured cannot walk to the center and back. Not in the time we have. Calder pointed to the lower map. There is a mining carrier in the gravity storage district. We saw it on our scan before the passage fell. If the power cell survived, I can drive it. Mara studied the path. The district's gravity stabilizers are failing. Then the vehicle may be on the ceiling, Gideon said. Calder considered that. I have driven in worse places. Of course you have. Seraya transferred her full, translated route map to Gideon's wrist unit. You now have every path I can read and every command I know is available. Everything that affects survival. That phrase still has room for trouble. It has less room than before. The two groups moved together toward the gravity district. Gideon walked beside Seraya. The trust between them had not been repaired. It had changed shape instead. He knew she could act under pressure, and she knew he could share control when another person had the better answer. Neither fact erased the key she had hidden. But when the floor began to tilt under their boots, Gideon handed her the route scanner without being asked. "Your city," he said. Seraya studied the moving walls ahead. "Not mine." "Good." I was about to complain about the maintenance budget. The gravity storage district had no reliable floor. For several minutes, the group stood at its entrance and watched whole blocks of shelving drift through a chamber taller than a surface tower. Stone platforms, sealed containers, broken machines, and sheets of metal hung in the air, as if Vardos had forgotten which direction they should fall. Then a low tone passed through the chamber. Everything moved at once. A slab the size of a house dropped sideways and shattered against a wall. Smaller debris followed, striking in a storm of fragments. The pull lasted 12 seconds, faded, and left the chamber weightless again. Mara studied the readings from 3 sensors fixed to the doorway. The direction changes with the stabilizer cycle, but the timing is not clean. The loads elsewhere in the city are altering it. "How dirty?" Gideon asked. The last shift came 19 seconds early. Darius pointed toward a mining carrier floating between 2 storage towers. "That is our vehicle." Calder narrowed his eyes. Power compartment looks intact. The carrier was a broad, armored machine with 6 articulated wheel assemblies and magnetic anchors along its underside. At the moment, its underside faced them and its cabin pointed toward what had once been the chamber ceiling. Seraya scanned the walls. Maintenance symbols marked the stable surfaces for each phase. Gideon began laying out rope. 2 lines. No one moves without both attached. Injured people stay between able climbers. He fired the first anchor into a support rib and tested it with his full weight. Calder secured the second. They crossed in groups, pushing from one floating structure to the next while Mara called the estimated time to the next gravity shift. Seraya went near the front. Gideon followed behind Harlan, keeping the medic's injured leg from twisting when they changed surfaces. 30 seconds, Mara called. The maintenance symbols on the far wall changed color. Seraya pointed upward relative to their current bodies. "That panel becomes the floor next." Gideon checked the structure. "Too smooth. No anchors." Because it was never meant for emergency use. The marked support behind it is load rated. Darius spoke through the group channel. "We can reach the carrier if we continue straight." "Straight becomes down in 20 seconds, Mara said. Darius ignored her and activated his suit thrusters for a short burst. He reached a floating platform closer to the carrier and drove in a magnetic spike. The forcing rig on his back flickered as he connected it to a nearby storage lock. Seraya saw him. "Do not open that. We need a stronger anchor. The lock belongs to the local stabilizer system." Darius engaged it anyway. The storage door opened. Power shifted. Gravity returned early. The chamber snapped sideways. Gideon saw the wall become the floor and turned his body, but a suspended frame struck him across the shoulder. His helmet hit the structure hard enough to fill his vision with white light. The ropes caught everyone else. Gideon's line went slack. He heard voices, but they came from the wrong directions. "Gideon, look at me," Seraya said. He saw her above him, then below, then to his left. The chamber refused to stay still. "Floor is blue," he said. "The blue panel is now the ceiling." "No. Yes. Your orientation is impaired." Another low tone began. Gideon gripped his anchor line. "Move to the western rib. That rib will become a fall path." "I know what I am doing." Seraya clipped her tether to his and turned to the others. "Stop following his spatial calls. Follow mine." Darius started to object. A container tore free and fell toward the western rib Gideon had chosen. It struck hard enough to bend the metal. Seraya moved them toward a band of small, triangular markings across the opposite surface. She entered a brief command through her decoder. The stabilizer tone changed. Command accepted for 7 seconds, she said. Push now. They crossed the gap as one chain. Gideon let Seraya pull him, fighting the instinct to correct her every time his damaged sense of direction told him she was taking them toward empty space. The field shifted again. The marked surface became the floor exactly as she had predicted. Everyone hit it on hands and knees, but no one fell through the open chamber. Seraya shut off the command before it drew more power. Harlan reached Gideon and checked his pupils. Concussion. Mild if you're lucky. I'm famously lucky. You are famously conscious. Do not confuse the two. They reached the carrier under Seraya's direction. Calder opened the power compartment and connected the industrial converter Tessa had repaired. The machine came alive one system at a time. Gideon sat against one wheel assembly while Harlan sealed a cold pack beneath his helmet lining. When the chamber finally stopped moving in his vision, Gideon stood and addressed the group. In spaces controlled by ancient interfaces, Seraya leads movement. I handle physical access and emergency action. No one overrides her because they are impatient. His eyes settled on Darius. Darius said nothing. The statement mattered more than an apology. Gideon had given Seraya authority in front of everyone, including himself. Calder rotated the carrier until its wheels met the current floor. We have power, but not full mobility. One steering joint is locked. I can repair it, Gideon said. Harlan pushed it back down. You can repair it after 10 minutes without vomiting. Your bedside manner lacks poetry. I save poetry for patients who listen. While Gideon rested, Seraya entered a sealed archive beside the carrier. The room contained no single central record. Instead, narrow data columns connected to separate environmental controls. At first, she thought the fragmentation came from age. Then she found repeated instructions left by the same group of engineers. They had split the historical record on purpose. Seraya called Mara and Gideon inside. She displayed the recovered fragments in chronological order. The oldest showed Vardos alive. Climate towers across the planet shared heat, water, air pressure, and geological stress. Each region had strict limits. When one area carried too much load, the network stopped and allowed recovery. Later records showed central cities requesting longer periods of perfect weather. Remote regions accepted temporary heat waves and storms in exchange for supplies. Temporary became routine. The system's limits were changed, first by small percentages, then by emergency exceptions, then by permanent priority rules. Settlements in the outer zones disappeared from administrative maps, even while people still lived there. The final engineers had discovered that officials were deleting reports about those regions. They divided the truth among maintenance stations so no single authority could erase it all. Seraya brought up the evacuation symbols from the entry shaft. The same engineering marks appeared beside them. They wrote the routes, she said. They were trying to get people out before the final cycle. Mara studied the last surviving data. The system did not turn against the population. No, it obeyed the modified priorities. Protect central infrastructure. Preserve climate in designated cities. Treat everything else as expendable load. Gideon leaned against the archive wall, still pale from the concussion. A machine followed instructions until the world died. A society followed them first, Seraya said. The archive did not contain the full restoration code. One section pointed toward the thermal balancer. Another referred to a central command layer farther below. They now knew what had happened, but not whether the original distributed system could be rebuilt. Calder finished powering the carrier. The injured were loaded into its rear compartment, and Harlan converted one bench into a treatment station. Gideon repaired the steering joint with a manual bypass because the electronic controller could not be trusted in the changing field. They traveled slowly out of the storage district. At the next stable chamber, Harlan ordered a short stop to recharge air filters from the carrier's cell. No one argued. Their suits smelled of dust, sweat, sealant, and overheated insulation. Seraya sat beside Gideon while Harlan checked the swelling beneath his helmet. You gave me command in front of Darius, she said. You were right. That statement appeared painful. The concussion helped. She looked toward the dark passage ahead. My family lived in an outer settlement on Elythra. The government called its power cuts temporary. Then the heat exchangers were removed and sent to the capital. Gideon said nothing, giving her room to continue. I left to study old climate systems. I told them I would return with something useful. My parents relocated years ago, but many others could not. That settlement is now on the list for permanent abandonment. You think returning without a solution means you left them for nothing. I think I used their suffering to build a career and promise myself it was acceptable because I would someday repair the damage. Gideon rubbed the edge of his glove. My license was suspended after a refinery evacuation. The owner removed 6 contract workers from the priority list because their transport coverage had expired. I took the only crawler and went back for them. You saved them. Yes. Then the rest of my team had to cross 7 kilometers on foot because I had taken their vehicle. 2 nearly died in the cold. Would you choose differently now? I would still go back. I would not hide the cost from the people who had to carry it with me. Seraya considered that. Elythra does not have time for a perfect answer, she said. A quick answer that kills the people farthest from the capital is not time saved. It is distance used as camouflage. Her eyes sharpened. That is easy to say when Earth is not losing air. You are right. Gideon's answer came without defense. I do not know what I would choose with your world in front of me. I only know you should see the price before someone asks you to call it necessary. The carrier's power indicator rose enough for them to continue. The thermal balancer lay beneath a reservoir of coolant. Tessa guided Calder into a maintenance bay, where a thick transparent wall revealed black liquid moving through immense pipes. Seraya connected the decoder to the local simulator and entered current climate data from Elythra. The system built a model. Warm zones spread across the planet. Atmospheric pressure stabilized around major cities. Agricultural belts regained viable temperatures. Population survival estimates climbed. For one stunned moment, the answer looked real. Then the map added absorption regions. Cold. Intensified across outer settlements. Storm corridors shifted toward already weakened districts. Geological stress concentrated beneath remote communities with the least infrastructure. Seraya recognized the first region immediately. It was the settlement where she had grown up. The simulator had chosen it because the area was sparsely defended, already damaged, and politically classified as low priority. No morality existed in the calculation, only efficiency based on the priorities supplied. Darius stared at the survival totals. The central cities still live, and the outer settlements die faster, Seraya said. If the alternative is losing the entire planet, that is the argument Vardos used until there was no outer region left. Gideon did not answer for her. He watched her study the command layers. Seraya found fragments of the original distributed architecture beneath the central priority system. It required 3 balancers to agree before large transfers could occur. No single station could force another to accept unsafe load. The design was slower and less efficient, but it prevented sacrifice zones. It could be restored, she said. Mara leaned over the map. On Vardos? Possibly. The thermal, gravity, and central balancers still hold separate parts of the control language. If we synchronize them, we may be able to stop the current transfers without destroying the whole system. And on Elythra? Gideon asked. We could build smaller stations from the principal. Not enough to rescue the planet at once. Enough to stabilize communities one network at a time. Darius shook his head. A slow system with no central owner will never receive funding. Then the funding system can explain why it needs people to freeze for a better return. Seraya looked around at both teams. Everyone deserves the full truth. The concentrated model could save many people quickly, but it does so by selecting other communities to absorb the damage. The distributed model is slower, costly, and may not reach everyone in time. I intend to recover the distributed controls. No one is required to follow me deeper for that purpose. Gideon added, the exit remains linked to the same central system. Walking away now does not open a path. But you know what we are attempting and what it costs. The choice was limited, but it was no longer hidden. Before anyone could respond, the carrier's radio caught a fragment of transmission from above. Darius's support ship was preparing to leave orbit once the electromagnetic storm crossed its safety limit. The message made no promise to wait for the extraction team. Darius listened twice. Then he walked away from the group. Tessa saw the forcing rig under his arm. Darius. He did not stop. The copied authorization handshake opened a maintenance hatch beside the thermal bay. Darius descended to a secondary control node and connected the forcing rig before anyone reached him. Seraya arrived as the ancient interface accepted the false identity. "You do not have a termination command," she said. "I need an active core. Once the ship sees proof of value, it stays. It may start a process you cannot stop. We are already trapped in a process we cannot stop." Tessa reached for the rig. The response loop is incomplete. Darius locked the physical clamps. "I'm not asking the city for permission." The node activated. At first, nothing happened. Then a pulse moved through the floor, too deep to be heard and strong enough to be felt in bone. Across the map, dormant lines ignited. On the surface, climate towers forced their way through layers of stone. Underground, transport routes rotated toward the center. Pressure fell in outer districts as heat and geological energy began moving inward. Mara's instrument screamed. "The crust is coupling to the network," she said. "This is not local anymore." The control node displayed an ancient status message announcing that the final central recovery cycle had resumed. Tessa stared at Darius. "You did not start it. You continued it." Seraya read the projected loads. The last command was never completed. The city is drawing every remaining reserve toward the central zone. Gideon grabbed Darius by the front of his suit and pulled him away from the rig. "Turn it off." "I cannot." Mara calculated in silence, then spoke with visible effort. 4 hours and 20 minutes. Before crust failure. Less if another major system is forced. "What happens above?" Harlan asked. "The fracture releases a radiation pulse through the old tower network. Both ships could be disabled or destroyed." The room changed with that sentence. No one was hunting a discovery anymore. No contract, license, archive, or claim mattered if Vardo's tore itself open beneath them. Gideon looked at Seraya. Could the distributed system stop it? Yes, if the 3 control layers can still be synchronized. Everything you know. No more categories. No more deciding what counts as survival information. Seraya felt the weight of the hidden key, the copied signal, and every decision that had led to the node. "You will have everything," she said, "including what it costs Elithra." Gideon released Darius. "Good. From now on, every secret is just another way to shorten 4 hours." Seraya built the plan on the floor of the thermal bay because the central display had become too unstable to trust. She projected 3 control diagrams into the dust. The first belonged to the thermal balancer beneath them. The second was the gravity system they had crossed. The third was the central command core, deeper inside the city. All 3 must enter distributed mode within the same 14-minute cycle, she said. If one remains under central priority, it will pull the load back and undo the others. Mara pointed to the surface grid. Even if we balance the underground network, the external towers have nowhere to send the energy. Seraya opened another layer of the archive map. A narrow maintenance route climbed from the lower city to a surface coordination tower. A mobile routing core must connect there. The outer stations are damaged, but enough still answer to spread the load across Vardo's instead of concentrating it beneath us. Darius looked at the route. That tower is almost above the storm front. "It is above the central fracture line," Gideon said, "which means it may remain standing long enough." "May?" Harlan asked. "Scientific term." Seraya assigned the technical requirements. Mara had the only instruments capable of predicting the gravity cycle, and Calder was the only person who could drive the carrier through the storage district. They would return to the gravity balancer. Tessa would remain at the thermal balancer with 1 industrial converter. Harlan would establish a relay and treatment point in the upper pressure corridor, where the injured could wait near the eventual escape route. Seraya had to reach the central command core. The original distributed limits were written in fragments across the system, but only the center could remove the later priority layer. Gideon would take the routing core to the surface tower. Darius objected immediately. "You are giving the artifact to him. I am giving the routing core to the person who can reach the tower," Seraya said. "My team has surface extraction training. Your team forced a control node after being warned the command was incomplete." Darius's face hardened. "My ship was leaving us. And now both ships may be lost," Gideon said. "You can help, or you can remain beside the machine you woke up. Those are the available positions." The argument ended because the city shook hard enough to drop dust from the ceiling. Mara checked the countdown. 4 hours, 6 minutes. They separated at the thermal bay. Tessa wore the best remaining insulated suit, but Harlan's inspection found 3 weak seals and a damaged heat layer along one arm. "You have 4 minutes at full coolant exposure," he told her. 5 if you enjoy permanent nerve damage." "I do not." "Good. It saves another conversation." The thermal converter had to be attached to 2 locks on opposite sides of the submerged mechanism. Seraya guided Tessa through the first lock using the archive symbols. Black coolant closed over her helmet as she descended. Tessa reached the converter mount, secured the industrial unit, and opened the first control. The thermal map shifted, but the second lock remained dark. "It is farther down," Tessa said through the cable channel. "Behind the primary exchanger." Harlan watched her body readings. "You cannot reach it and return." Gideon checked the route map. Returning to help would cost him nearly 40 minutes and leave too little time to reach the tower. Seraya searched the city diagram. "There is a bypass valve above the central pipe. If I open it, the reservoir temperature will drop for 90 seconds. Mara's voice came through the relay from the carrier. "Where does the heat go?" Seraya followed the highlighted route. Into the corridor they had planned to use for evacuation. She looked at Gideon. He understood before she spoke. "If you open it, that route is gone. It will become a thermal channel. No suit we have can cross it." Calder spoke from the carrier. "Then we lose the only intact road back to the entry levels." Seraya transmitted the full map to every group. "The alternative is abandoning the thermal balancer. If we do that, the distributed cycle cannot begin." No one answered for several seconds. Tessa's breathing grew louder through the channel. "This lock is jammed because our forcing rig overloaded it," she said. "Open the valve. I will finish the connection." Harlan looked at Seraya. Her choice is informed. Seraya entered the bypass sequence. The valve opened. Heat surged out of the reservoir and raced into the evacuation corridor. On the map, the route turned white. At the same time, Tessa's suit temperature dropped enough for her to move behind the exchanger. She reached the second lock with 20 seconds left, fitted the converter leads, and forced the old mechanism into standby. Harlan hauled her out on the safety cable as the reservoir reheated. Tessa emerged shaking and barely responsive, but alive. The thermal balancer registered as ready. The evacuation corridor did not. Gideon looked at the white line on the map. "We have no return path. We have the surface tower route and the pressure corridor," Seraya said. "If they remain intact, that is now our entire plan." It was the price everyone agreed to. He studied her, then nodded. She had not hidden the cost or made the choice alone. The difference mattered. Mara and Calder reached the gravity district in the carrier while the field was changing twice as fast as before. Seraya could hear their updates through the wired relays as she and Gideon moved toward the central junction. The carrier climbed a wall under magnetic traction, waded through a weightless phase, then drove across a platform just before gravity pulled sideways. One of the 3 anchors Mara had marked tore free. The carrier slammed against the support tower. Its steering assembly survived, but the frame holding the gravity balancer began drifting out of alignment. "We can leave now and preserve the vehicle," Calder said, "or use the carrier as a counterweight. If the balancer moves another meter, no command will hold it," Mara replied. Calder looked at the machine that represented his team's last valuable asset and their only full transport. Then he drove it beneath the drifting frame, extended all 6 wheel arms, and locked the carrier to the structure. Metal groaned as the vehicle took the load. "The carrier is not leaving," Calder said. "Will the balancer stay?" Seraya asked. "As long as the frame stays attached to the vehicle." Mara connected her instruments to the control. Gravity station ready. The sacrifice changed the escape plan again. The injured could no longer be transported in the armored carrier. Calder detached a small cargo tug from its rear assembly and used it to pull Harlan's treatment sled toward the upper pressure corridor. Gideon and Seraya reached the split between the central core and the surface maintenance route. The routing core rested inside a shock frame on the tug. It was smaller than Gideon expected, a dense cylinder with 3 physical connectors and no independent power source. He examined its energy requirement. Then he examined it again. "Problem?" Seraya asked. "The converter can wake it, but the surface link needs stable current. The industrial cells fluctuate in this field. What source do we have that does not?" Neither of them needed long to answer. Gideon touched the rescue beacon fixed beneath his shoulder plate. Its hardened battery had guided the survey ship through interference and powered the wired relay clock since the shaft closed. "The beacon cell," he said. "Once I break the housing, it cannot transmit again. Then the ship cannot locate you on the surface. The tower gives you a fixed point, not after it begins to collapse." Gideon connected his wrist unit to the routing core and quietly changed the route assignments. Seraya would go to the central core, complete the rewrite, and then lead everyone toward a sealed shelter near the pressure corridor. He would take the core to the tower and remain there long enough to finish the link. He did not include a return route for himself. Seraya saw the missing line. "You removed your extraction path. The tower route is unstable. One person has better odds than 2. You plan to destroy the beacon and tell me after you had already gone. I plan to make sure the only person who can rebuild the system survives. That is not your decision. It is my job to keep people alive. By deciding which person must carry the cost without being asked." Her voice stayed controlled, but anger sharpened every word. "Vardos died because someone always believed they had the authority to assign sacrifice. You are assigning yourself, but you are still making everyone else live inside your choice. I am not sending anyone else into danger. You are sending me into a future built on your death and calling it protection." The city trembled. Somewhere far above, another tower broke through stone. Gideon looked away from her, toward the route he had already decided to take. Seraya stepped closer. "You told me your mistake at the refinery was not going back. It was hiding the cost from the people who had to share it." He closed his eyes for one breath. She was right, and being right did not make the tower less dangerous. "What do you propose?" he asked. "We decide with the full plan. The pressure network may give Calder a fixed recovery zone if I can't control it from the center. You use the beacon battery only after the tug reaches that zone. We do not pretend the odds are good, but we do not erase the return route because you find hope inefficient." Gideon gave a humorless breath that almost became a laugh. "Hope has poor field discipline. So do you." He restored the extraction line on the map. Then Seraya opened a hidden control layer on her decoder. "There is another cost," she said. "The distributed limits cannot survive if the central priority architecture remains available. I have to erase it. Completely. The fast model for Elythra. Yes. If I keep it, someone can restore sacrifice zones later. If I delete it, I destroy the only design capable of stabilizing our major cities quickly." Gideon did not tell her what to choose. He asked, "What kind of system do you want your world saved by?" Seraya looked at the map of her childhood settlement, still stored in the simulation. "One that cannot survive by pretending people far away do not count. Then we lose the beacon and the central model together. We choose to lose them." He held out his hand. She took it. The pressure of her fingers was steady. "No more hidden prices," Gideon said. "No more protective lies." They released each other before the moment could become something easier than what waited ahead. Calder arrived with the cargo tug, Harlan, and the injured. Tessa lay under thermal blankets but remained conscious. Mara stayed at the gravity balancer, connected through the last intact relay. Darius stood beside the tug, looking at the routing core. Seraya gave the final timing instructions. When a central clock entered the next 14-minute cycle, Tessa would trigger the thermal balancer, Mara would trigger gravity, Seraya would rewrite central command, and Gideon would connect the surface tower. If any station missed the window, the network would return a central draw. Harlan guided the injured toward the pressure corridor. Calder prepared the tug to follow once Gideon and the core reached the upper route. Darius offered to help move the core. Gideon did not trust him, but the tower path required 2 people to maneuver the shock frame through the first lift. You carry the rear. You do not touch the control connectors. They loaded the core onto the tug and entered the maintenance incline. Halfway up, Darius locked the tug's rear clamp. Gideon turned as Darius pulled the routing core free and attached it to his suit frame. The support ship will stay if I bring this to the recovery ridge, Darius said. The ridge will not exist when the crust breaks. You have your 3 balancers. Use them. The surface connection is what lets them distribute the load. Darius backed toward a service rail leading away from the tower. Then find another core. There is no other core. Gideon saw the tug's steering wheel, the rail junction, and the last 2 shaped charges on his belt. He did not waste time arguing. He placed 1 charge against the outer guide and triggered it. The blast bent the wheel assembly inward. The tug dropped off the side rail and jammed across the junction, blocking the route to the recovery ridge. Darius remained on the only line still open, the one leading toward the tower. You destroyed our transport, Darius said. I improved your sense of direction. Calder separated the smaller tow module before the damaged tug settled. He attached Harlan's sled and headed toward the pressure corridor with the injured. Darius carried the core upward. Gideon followed across a series of narrow bridges as the maintenance units emerged around them. The machines recognized the routing core as a displaced component. Cutting arms reached for its frame. Darius used the forcing rig to knock one aside, but every pulse drew more power and shook the bridge. Stop forcing the system, Gideon said. It is trying to take the core. It is also holding the bridge. A support cable snapped. The bridge tilted toward the abyss below. Darius climbed faster. Gideon followed, using his last anchor line to swing around a missing section. Above them, stormlight flashed through a break in the surface rock. The tower stood beyond it, black against the sky filled with dust and electrical fire. At the central junction, Seraya watched their signals separate. Gideon's beacon moved toward the tower. Darius remained beside him. Then the line between Seraya and the surface failed. She turned toward the command core. Its doors opened as if the city had been waiting for her. Inside, the Elithris simulation appeared without being requested. Warm cities glowed across the map. Survival estimates rose. Outer settlements darkened. The system offered the solution she had crossed Vardos to find. Above her, the 14-minute cycle began. The surface tower leaned into the storm as Gideon climbed through the final hatch. Wind struck him with enough force to drive one knee against the metal deck. Dust erased the horizon. Electrical arcs moved through the clouds and grounded themselves on the tower's upper frame in blue-white flashes. Darius stood 20 meters ahead, one arm around the routing core, the other gripping a safety rail. Between them and the central mount, maintenance machines crawled over the deck, cutting loose anything the old system identified as misplaced. The recovery ridge is east, Darius shouted over the suit channel. The ship can still find us there. My beacon is the only thing the ship can find in this storm. Then bring it with me. The beacon powers the tower. Darius looked at the central mount, then at the core in his arms. You would destroy our only signal for a system that may not work. If we do not, there will be no ship left to signal. A maintenance arm struck the core frame. Darius twisted away and nearly lost his footing. Gideon crossed the deck low, clipping his tether to each rail section before releasing the last. He cut one machine's drive joint, then used its fallen body as a shield against another. Darius reached the central mount first. Instead of installing the core, he tried to detach the portable frame so he could carry the entire assembly toward the ridge. The mount locked around the lower connector. Darius pulled harder. Let it go, Gideon said. You do not understand what returning empty means. I understand exactly. You're trying to make the contract valuable enough that the people above remember you are still down here. They left us once already. And taking that core will make the planet kill them before they can leave twice. The deck shifted. One of the tower legs dropped into a widening crack. Darius lost his grip on the rail and slid toward the broken edge, still chained to the core frame by his carrying harness. The harness caught for half a second, then began pulling the core out of the mount with him. Gideon could have cut the harness. The core would remain. Darius would fall. Instead, Gideon threw himself flat, locked one boot beneath the rail, and caught Darius's forearm. The full weight of the man and the core dragged Gideon across the deck. His tether snapped tight. "Release the frame," Gideon said. Darius looked down into the dust-filled fracture. "It is all we have." "No, it is all your contract has." Another maintenance unit reached the core and began cutting the outer brace. Darius released one hand from the frame and grabbed Gideon's arm. Gideon hauled until Darius could hook an elbow over the deck. The core mount cracked. If Darius kept holding the portable frame, both men and the core would go over the edge. He let go. Gideon pulled him back onto the deck. For one stunned second, they lay beside each other in the storm. Then the central mount folded sideways. Darius rolled to it and used both hands to hold the broken support in place. "Install it," he said. Gideon lifted the routing core into the mount. The three physical connectors locked, but the power indicator remained dark. He removed the rescue beacon from beneath his shoulder plate. The casing had been designed to survive impact, radiation, and vacuum. It had not been designed to be opened in a storm. Gideon drove his cutter through the rear seam and peeled the housing apart. The signal icon on his wrist vanished. Below the tower, Calder would no longer know his exact position. The survey ship would see only interference. Gideon connected the hardened battery to the routing core. The mount lit. "Surface station ready," he said into the failing relay. Only static answered. Deep beneath him, Seraya stood before the central command interface. The system displayed Elythra in layers of possibility. One model saved the major cities within a year. Farms remained warm. Air pressure stabilized. Hospitals kept power. Along the outer regions, absorption loads climbed until settlement markers disappeared. The other model was incomplete. Small distributed stations formed a slow chain across the planet. Some regions survived. Others required evacuation while new stations were built. No central authority could force the network to exceed local safety limits. It saved fewer people quickly and offered no guarantee that enough stations could be constructed in time. The central system did not speak. It did not tempt her with a voice or image. It simply presented numbers. That made the choice harder. Seraya opened the first fragment recovered from the archive. It defined shared load. The second fragment from the thermal balancer defined recovery limits. The third, held in the gravity station, defined the right of a local node to refuse unsafe transfer. Mara's signal appeared on the central clock, confirming that the gravity station was ready. Tessa's followed, confirming thermal readiness. The surface station remained uncertain. Seraya sent the last wired pulse toward the tower. Gideon confirmed. Static filled the channel. Then his voice broke through. "Tower ready. Beacon is gone." Seraya placed her hand on the central control. The interface warned her that deleting the central model would be permanent. She thought of her childhood settlement. She remembered the cold hallways after the first exchanger was removed, and officials explaining that the loss would protect more important population centers. She remembered promising to return with something powerful enough that no one could ignore them again. Power was not the same as protection. She initiated deletion. The central priority layer resisted, redirecting authority through backup paths. Seraya used the archive fragments to close them one by one. Each closure destroyed part of the fast model. Detailed engineering maps vanished. Whole climate profiles collapsed into unreadable blocks. The survival estimate for the central cities fell. Her hand shook, but she continued. At the final lock, the system asked for a replacement rule. Seraya entered 3 limits. No region could be forced to accept load beyond its recovery threshold. Any transfer required participation from multiple stations. If one station exceeded its safe limit, the entire network would reduce output rather than move the excess to a weaker region. She transmitted the command. "Now," she said. Mara activated the gravity balancer. The carrier frame groaned as the old system tried to pull out of alignment. Calder's locked wheel arms held. Tessa activated the thermal balancer. Her repaired converter flared, burned through one coupling, and settled into a stable current. Gideon connected the routing core. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the central draw reversed. Energy that had been rushing toward the buried city moved outward through the ancient tower network. Heat spread across dead plains. Geological stress divided among distant faults instead of concentrating beneath the center. The electromagnetic storm widened, then began to weaken. On Seraya's map, one region flashed above its safety limit. The new rules reduced output automatically. Another region refused load. The network slowed again. Vardos stopped trying to save its dead central city by destroying everything around it. The planet did not become alive. It simply stopped dying faster. At the surface tower, the sudden redistribution tore the damaged foundation apart. The deck dropped beneath Gideon. He and Darius fell onto a slanted section of tower that began sliding toward the central fracture. Darius caught a cable. Gideon struck the deck and lost his cutter. The routing core remained connected above them, but the lower tower section broke free. "Gideon," Seraya's voice returned through the relay. "Network is active," he said, pulling himself toward Darius. "Tower is becoming less active." The section slid faster. Without the beacon, Calder could not locate them in the dust. The cargo tug waited at the pressure corridor several kilometers away. Seraya opened the surface maintenance map. The evacuation symbols from the entry shaft reappeared. Their routes connected to pressure channels running beneath the tower. Earlier, she had used one bypass to cool Tessa's reservoir. The same network contained 3 large release valves. If opened in sequence, they could send a directed burst through the maintenance trench beneath the sliding tower section. If opened too early, the pressure would strike the full tower and break it apart. If opened too late, Gideon and Darius would already be inside the fracture. Mara sent the remaining crust readings to the central core. Seraya calculated the speed of the sliding section, the delay through each channel, and the reduced pressure available now that the network was distributed. "Calder," she said, "move to the western edge of the recovery zone. You will have one chance. I do not have Gideon's signal. You will have the tower." Seraya opened the first valve. Deep beneath the surface, compressed gas entered the old transport channel. She waited 3 seconds and opened the second. The tower section reached the lip of the fracture. Gideon wrapped his tether around Darius and a surviving support bar. "Whatever she is doing," he said, "I hope it is the correct, long explanation." The third valve opened. A column of gas erupted beneath the sliding structure. The first impact lifted one side. The second turned it. The tower section shot away from the fracture, skimming across broken ground toward the pressure corridor. Gideon's tether nearly tore free. Darius locked both arms around the support bar. The structure struck the surface twice, shedding metal, then stopped against a ridge of stone. Calder drove the smaller tow module through the thinning dust. He found them by the shape of the fallen tower, exactly where Seraya had predicted. Harlan helped drag Gideon aboard. Gideon looked toward the buried city as the storm began to clear. "Tell Seraya her city tried to throw me into a hole." Calder secured his harness. "She just threw you out of one. That is a meaningful distinction." The survey ship descended into the western recovery zone on its last safe approach. Its engines fought unstable air all the way down. Harlan used the final reserve oxygen to keep Tessa and the injured workers stable while Calder loaded them. Mara left the gravity station only after the central display confirmed the network would hold without her. The carrier remained locked beneath the balancer, buried with the city's remaining core systems. Seraya was the last person out of Central Command. Before she left, The ancient system sealed the chamber and collapsed the access route behind her. The detailed central design was gone. No second expedition could simply return and recover it. The survey ship lifted as Vardos's electromagnetic storm closed again. In orbit, both ships had spent most of their reserve fuel holding position. Darius's support ship had remained, not because his contract suddenly mattered, but because Tessa transmitted Mara's projection showing that an early departure would cross the radiation front. Both ships escaped together after the front weakened. No one returned with a complete climate core. Months later, Gideon's professional review ended exactly as he expected. Mara's logs, Harlan's medical record, and Calder's testimony proved that his decisions had prevented greater loss. They also proved he had violated retreat orders, destroyed protected equipment, and used the rescue beacon as a power source. He avoided criminal liability, but he lost his commercial field license. Seraya's return to Eleuthera was no kinder. She brought the principles of distributed climate control, partial station architecture, and safety rules that could not be removed without rebuilding the entire network. She did not bring the concentrated model that could stabilize the major cities quickly. Her institute dismissed her from its primary research position. Officials called the missing data an irreversible loss, and some communities called it betrayal. Tessa left the extraction company before its internal review could assign her another site. She released the converter records and the portions of the thermal architecture she had rebuilt by hand. Those records became the practical bridge between Seraya's ancient control language and equipment that modern crews could manufacture. Darius lost his command and the contract he had tried to save. He did not become an advocate or seek forgiveness. He submitted a technical statement confirming that the surviving cores on Vardos had sealed themselves and that any attempt to force them open could restart the same central cycle. Coming from a man who had activated that cycle, the warning carried enough weight to stop the company from sending another secret team. The first temporary shelters on Earth received families from Eleuthera's coldest districts while the trial network was assembled. They were offered work, training, and a route home when their local stations became safe, not a demand to abandon their world permanently. Seraya understood then what refuge could mean when it was done properly. It was not possession, charity, or a promise that Earth would solve everything. It was room to survive while people kept ownership of the future they were trying to rebuild with their own hands. Seraya went to the settlement that would have become the first absorption zone. Earth engineering teams arrived with heat exchangers removed from reserve facilities, pressure regulators from unfinished habitats, and transport space for families who had to leave unsafe districts temporarily. They did not arrive with enough equipment to save Eleuthera at once. They arrived with enough to build one station. Gideon came with them. He stepped from a cargo shuttle wearing a plain field jacket without license markings. A tool case hung from one hand. Seraya met him beside the unfinished station. Cold wind moved dust across the foundation. "I heard you needed someone who can repair machinery during bad weather," he said. "We need someone who reads instructions before breaking machinery. That requirement may exceed my formal qualifications." "You no longer have formal qualifications. Then expectations should be flexible." She smiled and handed him a diagnostic unit. They worked through the next weeks as partners. Seraya directed the climate model and negotiated the safe load each local station could accept. Gideon opened frozen service trenches, repaired field pumps, and taught new crews how to work when the wind made instruments useless. He did not decide when Seraya should rest. He asked. She did not hide bad projections to keep him from worrying. She showed him the numbers. On the first full test night, the settlement's old heaters stopped trembling one by one. Temperature held inside the homes. Pressure remained stable. Water began moving through a pipe that had been frozen for 3 years. Seraya watched the balance display. No neighboring region exceeded its limit. No distant settlement darkened, so this one could remain warm. Gideon stood beside her with oil across one glove. "I should admit something. You still do not understand the control language. I understand several important parts. You call the load-sharing matrix the fairness wheel. It is memorable. It is wrong. Memorably wrong. She looked at him, then toward the homes where lights remained steady through the cold. The next station is farther north, she said. The terrain is worse. Sounds expensive. The Institute will not pay you. I have recently become available for unconventional employment. Seraya held out her hand. Gideon took it. This time there was no collapsing tower, failing relay, or countdown demanding that they let go. A warning light appeared on the nearest valve. Seraya raised one eyebrow. Gideon sighed. There it is. The city's mood ring. She kept hold of his hand for one more second, then released it and picked up her tools. Together they walked toward the valve while the first distributed station on Elythra carried its share of the night, and no more. They had not brought home a miracle. They had brought back a harder promise. No community would be kept warm by making another disappear. Thank you for traveling with us through this story. If Gideon and Seraya's journey stayed with you, please like the video and share it with someone who enjoys meaningful science fiction. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about humanity, distant worlds, and the choices that reveal who we truly are. Until our next journey, take care.